everybody, back to another episode of Black Tea. This is our podcast that is all about Black women in advertising, presented to you by Muse by Cleo. I'm happy to be your host today, and always, Michelle Lawrence. And I'm so happy that today we are sitting down with Alexis Madison. Hi, Alexis.
Hi.
Welcome, and thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Please do tell the people what you do and where you're based.
Yeah, so I'm based in New York, Brooklyn specifically, and I am a digital strategy director. So that really means that I am a strategist for every platform across the internet. I think is the easiest way I can describe it. So my specialty is definitely in social media, but that branches out to the entire digital ecosystem, frankly, and everything that social touches.
Okay. Wow, that's fascinating. How did you find your way into advertising?
Accidentally. And I think a lot of people do. I ended up consequently not studying advertising at all in school. My degree is in IT actually, but when I was in undergrad, there was a class called Social Media in Business that I loved and I found intriguing because I just love social media as a whole. And so I joined the class. The professor in it was really great. And I was like, how can I do more of this? He taught the fundamentals of what we now know as social strategy, but back then it wasn't labeled as such. And I apprenticed with him for like 2.5 years. And I was graduating and I was like, I know I'm not going to use my degree, but I don't know what I want to do. And he was like, have you ever thought of advertising? I said, no, not really. Didn't seem attractive to me. And he said, okay, well, think of it this way, take what you love and apply that to working within a very high, fast paced, creative environment. Could you do that? And I said, yeah, theoretically. So I applied for an internship and I was like, maybe I'll hate it. I don't know, but it's been 9 years. So I guess I'm done. I guess I feel the opposite about it, but it was a happy accident for sure.
Okay. Well, we're glad that it happened for you because that means it happened for us. It seems like a lot of your work so far has been in the fashion and beauty space, or at least I know that you have some strong thoughts. I wonder, what overarching challenge have you faced while working in fashion and beauty?
The biggest challenge, and one that impacts me personally and professionally, is that within those spaces, they are in charge of so much of what we deem worthy or powerful as engagers in mainstream culture. However, whatever is considered worthy in that world doesn't encompass the majority of the real world, right? There are very specific demographics that are deemed powerful enough, strong enough, influential enough to be in that space. And so often I find that my work is about opening up the definition of who we deem our target in order to help our clients understand that we have to represent the world that we serve. And that extends far beyond sort of the niches and those, like, for lack of a better term, popularized cultures that we tend to go back to. And so I would say, at least from an ethnic perspective, as odd as that sounds, that's been a lot of my focus, right? So I am in a position now where I work mostly on beauty brands, and I like to say that my charge is effectively changing the color of our main target. And I mean that literally. Like, how do we figure out how to expand our audience, think about talking to more people, expand who we deem wanting to connect with us, and things of that sort. But that's really just one step in true diversity, but it's a one step at a time phase. So it's important to me that across all of the brands that I'm on, there's a very strict understanding that reflection of world is something that both of these industries do really, really poorly at. And there are so many people fighting the good fight, and I hope to consider myself one of those.
Yeah, I think you can. What? Is there a beauty or fashion campaign out there that you're really fond of now? Like, who's doing it well for you? I don't know if there's a North Star yet, but someone that's getting close in terms of nailing it with this initiative in fashion and beauty?
I think there are certainly brands that do it well, but I think every brand really struggles with featuring people of color as an interesting nuance.
Right.
rather than a standard of life. So, when I think of beauty specifically, the brand Youth to the People does an amazing job of just showcasing all kinds of faces. All faces have skin, all skin needs skincare, I think is how they really go about it. I remember when I first saw one of their campaigns, I felt like they were one of the brands that truly didn't feel like each person of color was an ornament on
Right.
set. They were
Yeah.
just a part of the general group, the general target. And so that was really exciting to me. I think with fashion, I've really loved the brand Girlfriend Collective. They started as size inclusive from the very beginning, but they are also, at least in what I've seen, non-color bias in the way that they just present models. They're also non-ableist, which I think is amazing. So they truly just show all people, all bodies wearing and using their product, which is great. That said, they are two brands in a very, very big ecosystem. And they have a lot of, I would say, bigger competitors that stand next to them that don't really engage in much in DE&I efforts, but for lack of a better term, just don't showcase people of color as being a normal subset of their community. So they're two lovely examples. I just personally hate that there are so few of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Girlfriend Collective goes hard too. I remember picking up a pair of their leggings when they were in their very early stages, and those things are still hanging on. Like, they're really great. So shout out to them. People should check
Shout
it
out to them. I'm wearing them right now. So shout out to them for keeping it in. It's been years and I truly do love their product.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that that people often notice, that especially when you're thinking about sustainability and in fashion and beauty, there seems to be almost like a price barrier for that. I'm wondering if, in your experience, what are your thoughts on making sustainability in fashion and beauty more accessible to folks of different, economic abilities?
I think it's absolutely a necessity. Often the maybe complaint or excuse brands tend to come up with about not being sustainable is that it is just too expensive, right? And that it costs a lot to use recycled products, or maybe bottles, jars, things made of glass that are more beneficial for anybody as a whole. But when we think about sustainability efforts to keep our ecosystem, our environment strong and healthy, and not having our consumerism impact that, people of color are always directly impacted, and more so heavily impacted than their white counterpart when it comes to those issues and initiatives. What I think is probably the most frustrating part of that is that although people of color, I'll say all people of color, are the biggest demographic, they're just listened to the least. And so it's difficult because when you don't listen to the largest demographic, that means you're completely ignoring the needs, the wants that they have. But the want for sustainable products, sustainable services to be available at an open and honest, I will say, price point for folks of color to enjoy is vital. It's just not prioritized in the same way that people of color aren't really prioritized in just being visible or being seen. So I think it can often feel like when you're asking for the things that maybe white counterparts have in marketing, you sort of have to be asked to make a sacrifice, right? Do I want to be seen, or do I want to have products that are sustainable for me? Do I want my rights and my life nuances to be acknowledged in an honest way? Or do I want to make sure that like prices aren't going to go up $10, $15 in a second, or products in my neighborhood aren't going to be put behind a plastic shelf because of assumptions about culture and things that go on in that space? So it is a very large bias that impacts every facet of business, and sustainability is certainly a part of that.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so just a slight pivot here. You mentioned that traveling is sort of the biggest teacher, one of the biggest teachers for you professionally and personally. I'm wondering what the greatest lesson is that traveling has taught you.
Probably that 10,000 times less than what you think about anything at all. And that is everything from family to community to the way public spaces are meant to be serviced, to preservation of history, to the way that stories are told. I grew up in a very small town in New Jersey. And so I didn't really get to travel until I was out of college. The first time I ever traveled anywhere, it was to Iceland, which Iceland I love, but that was a small introduction to what non-US life was like. So how you treat family members, how you enjoy meals, things felt very foreign to me. And then in a non-pun way, not just because I was out of my home, but because I was asked to consider my own fundamentals of what I understand and believe about how you conduct yourself. And the immediate, I would say, revelation that I had was that being in a new country really makes you feel like you're just one of 8 billion people. And there are so many other ways that people can go about things, do things, enjoy things. And so that's been my biggest. It also asks me often to question my biases, even when I'm back home. So the way that I assume people like and do things based on how I've labeled them, it just doesn't fly in the US, or rather outside the US, in the same way that it does here. And it asks me to just question a lot about myself and what I've learned and what habits I've ingrained just because of where I live. So I consistently go out of this country, and I like to almost remain like a fly on the wall anywhere that I am, because I'm like, I just want to watch and listen. I don't need to bring anything with me. This is not about taking my routines and replicating them here to have it be a true lesson. I just have to remain student. And it can be difficult sometimes to be honest with yourself about the behaviors you exhibit that you might not even like, but it's been one of my greatest sources of just awareness and acknowledgement of larger life outside of what I know in myself and when I'm around in New York.
Yeah, you said something that I think is so key, and it's such a practical kind of shift that we can all make when we travel, and that is not trying to replicate our same routine wherever we are. You know, like first I do this, and then I go do this, and I go do this. Where can I do that exact same thing here? And you guys need to fit me. So being more open than that, and going into it with a mindset of like, I don't know what the day looks like in this neighborhood or in this town or in this country. Like let me kind of be more of an observer and absorber, as opposed to, you know, trying to make it fit my normal US mold. I think it's a good nugget.
Absolutely. And it's hard. And I always acknowledge that with people. Like, as much as vacationing is fun, don't get me wrong, it's fun. Being new somewhere is hard. And I get that completely. But I often find that the hardest thing is not necessarily existing in a new environment as much as it is opening yourself up to newness. And that can happen in ways. You can start that at home and then take that with you abroad. So once you take that step, everything sort of unfolds. You can experience things in a whole new way, and it is truly like life altering. It's my favorite.
What was your last trip?
Oh, my last trip was Iceland. I went back last August because I was trying to catch the Northern Lights with a few friends. I missed it by 24 hours, so that was just like terrible. But I still had a good time. I still had a good time. Nonetheless. But yeah, it was definitely Iceland. I'll go back one more time. I promise we'll see them. But it was. I've already got trips planned this year too, so it's habitual. Now that I'm in it in the travel groove, like my world just it rotates around where I want to be on this planet, and then all the rest of my schedule just comes out of that.
That's beautiful. That's life. You've talked about Black self-care as a form of protest. Can you unpack that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so when self-care as I'll say, I'll quote, an interesting thing to do started to rise in mainstream culture, I approached it, I think, similarly to everyone else, which was that, like, absolutely, I deserve to do a face mask, and absolutely, I deserve to like indulge and give in myself, and like 100%, this is what I want, and it's what I need. And it was around the beginning of the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 that there were a lot of articles coming out about how Black people need to take care of themselves in times of like disarray, for lack of a better term, obviously states of protest being one of them. I was an active protester in 2020, and I did feel like there was a sense of depletion that you don't necessarily feel when you're outside of that environment. And I was looking for ways to really just find rest and ease and comfort and when I was looking through articles, one of the things that struck me very explicitly is the fact that self-care as we know it is not the original and intended form of the movement. It was designed to be a a term that acknowledged Black people, specifically around the 60s and 70s, so another time of tumult, taking care of themselves at home in response to a medical system that would never fulfill their needs. So it wasn't, how do I treat and give to myself? It was, what are the literal practices I need to instill in my routine at home to keep myself healthy and alive? Because if I don't, and then I have to go into a hospital, that feels like a bigger risk to me in and of itself. And there are no barriers to bias, especially when it comes to care. We still see that today. And that really struck me because I've certainly had my own, albeit, thank goodness, non-emergent, but specific experiences with doctors, medical professionals, and their bias when it came to just treating me as a woman and as a Black woman. And so that struck me very honestly. I really had to consider what it's like to just reorient myself around this idea that I have to be able to preserve me as much as I can in response to the environment and the world and the society in which I live. So it truly changed my opinion on self-care. It changed the way I understand and prioritize rest, which is vital for me and I think for everybody. So when you go back to the source of what it actually means, it's just more powerful for me and it means so much more. And it was derived in an era in which my mother was a young girl, 9 or 10, living in New York, but my grandparents were also living here and dealing with their own struggles of trying to, abide by law and also engage in a medical system that didn't suit them. So the idea that you have to take care of yourself is a unique burden on people of color, but especially on Black people in America. And so I take it far more seriously now than I ever had before I understood what the true meaning of self-care actually is.
Oh my God. That's big. That's big and that's heavy. I mean, it's beautiful. It's just another one of those ways in which, our community has had to stretch and expand and in order to essentially surround itself in ways that, larger society maybe did not surround us. So that's amazing. Wow. That's just going to sit with me today, I think. That's big. That's big. I love that so much. And I also just love the parallel path of taking care of yourself and also growing in your career. I think that some people, a lot of folks, and they don't think this out of nowhere, but, experience has kind of made them feel that it's kind of a choice between the two. I can either take care of myself or I can grow, I can have upward mobility, I can grind. So what are the balances there? But you have grown a lot at your agency being right where you are. So I just want to give you an opportunity to brag on that for a second, talk your shit, talk about your rise, where you are and to the level that you are at now. And, what do you know that you brought to the table that makes where you are now 100% deserved?
Wow, that's so lovely. Thank you. It took me probably 4 years to validate my existence in any space or role or occupation. And it was hard for me to even have to reflect on that and justify with myself that I was going through a portion of my career thinking I wasn't meant to be there and that there was always somebody who could do it better and I was slower or behind or less than or wasn't being fast enough or strong enough. And at my previous agency, I actually had an amazing mentor, and she was not a person of color, but she was very honest with me, and she said, at the end of the day, companies are designed to profit. And so I was kind of like, okay, where are you going with this? This is not helpful to me. And she was like, consider that a compliment, because if you weren't able to bring in profit, you wouldn't be employed. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
See what he did? I was like, you walked a long walk, but like, I'll accept that. I'll accept that. And so when she said that, I knew that I had to do two things for myself. I was like, number one, it's time for me to really push and accelerate and see how far I can go with what I have and what I know. The second was I wanted an environment change. I wanted to move to an agency that was a little bit smaller, and maybe had less of I would say the big overarching, we have a holding company and big feeling and you have to push so hard, and felt more personable and one-to-one. Because to me, I find I'm actually highly capable of my job, but I struggle with being introverted, which I found was a reflection of my feeling unworthy. I was
Mhm.
like, oh, I'm so small, I'm so quiet. I'm like, if someone asks me a question, I'll answer it and I'll kind of sit aside. And so I needed to go to a company that really forced me to be at the forefront of my talent and of my knowledge and of my work, because there was nobody to speak on my behalf. There was nobody to kind of step in and be the intermediary person. So when I got to the role that I'm in now, once I found, it feels like cliche to say found your voice, but I really did. Once I really got my footing and who I am and what I can provide, the next thing I had to do was check myself very quickly on my expectations of perfection. Because when I often find that I can do something, I think a lot of people are this way, especially Black people. When I know that I can do something really, really well, I'm going to give it to you 10,000% every single time,
Mhm.
because I was born and bred to excel, not succeed, but excel. I am supposed to be up and beyond. And excelling to me really is just burning the candlestick at both ends.
Yeah.
And so I had to respect myself and my boundaries, but I also had to be really honest about what standard I was holding myself to, and how could I still deliver the top tier work that I knew without literally eroding myself, without feeling like I need to give every single hour that I have, every single minute. I must always be on and aware and alert. When I started to make the sacrifices of time and put up personal boundaries for myself, I did better in my job than I ever had before,
Mhm.
because I wasn't throwing myself into it. I wasn't dissolving myself into my job title. And the moment I stopped doing that, I jumped titles very quickly, because I was focusing. I was doing better work. I was doing stronger, more focused work. I was learning how to delegate and saying, I can do one thing really, really amazingly, and I can rely on a team. That's why you have a team, to help me do these other 3 or 4 things, because that's also important. I put myself first, and I put my boundaries second. And after that, my career trajectory really took off, and has consistently done so for the last like 3.5, almost 4 years. So when anybody ever asks me, how have you gone this far? Reground yourself, recenter yourself in you, and figure out what you can give and what you want to give. Once you set up that boundary, hold to it, and just do that as best you can for as long as you want to. That's the best advice I can ever give anybody.
Mhm. And it just helps to also be super insightful, very human centric, very knowledgeable, and very, I would say, open hearted. I've known you for like a half an hour, but I'm giving you open hearted. And I think all of that also contributes to you being exactly who you need to be to do exactly what you're doing for not only your company, but your industry and yourself. So I just have
Lovely,
one last.
lovely compliment from an ex-stranger, new friend, I will say. So thank you.
Yeah, and also you live in New York. I live in New York. You're like from New York though. I'm hearing multiple generations is what I heard. That's
Yes,
probably
we've been here just a
great.
little bit. My mom's side's been here a little bit. So my parents are Bed-Stuy till I die, folks.
Love that.
It's cool. It's nice to be back in their hometown, now my new home.
Oh, I love that. I just have one last question that I like to ask everyone. Are there any currently any Black owned businesses or products that you're really loving right now?
A lot of the brands that I love are skincare brands, frankly. So there's one brand called Skin Muse. They make this amazing body oil. They now make a perfume oil that I'm obsessed with. Honestly, it's one of those things that you put it on and you embody the idea of the song Brown Sugar. Do you know the song Brown Sugar by
Yes,
D'Angelo?
yes.
You just embody that immediately. The moment I put it on, I'm like, I'm Brown Sugar. This is poetic
She is
justice. Like
me, I am her. I am the reason
I am
you heard
her.
that song.
It's incredible. It makes you feel so absolutely just like abundant in self. And so I love that. There's another brand called Silk and Noir, which does the same thing, and they have body butters. So I, I am very much my grandparents' child. So I've got butters, I've got oils, I've got tinctures, like everything. This body stays moisturized. It is my pure, honestly, like ancestral legacy. And then honestly, the ways in which Black people have innovated in fashion always blow my mind. I love the brand Hanifa. I love Faye Noel. Those are some of my favorites, and there are always others, but those are top of mind for me.
Thank you so much. You put me on a couple of new things there that I'm going to have to go and look up, but definitely about that moisture life. I'm trying to be moisturized right now. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on Black Tea. It was fantastic to meet you. And I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure that our audience is going to get so much out of this. And I just want to say to the folks out there watching, if you got a lot out of this, which I know you did, head on over to musebycleo.com/Black Tea to check out all of our other episodes. And make sure y'all are following us on Instagram @SipBlackTea so you can never miss an episode. You'll know when the next ones are dropping. Thank you so much for watching. And that is our show, y'all. Bye.